Hello.
Hello.
So today I'd
Mm.
like to talk about self-awareness and the impact that has on building effective relationships.
Self-awareness.
Yeah,
Wow, that's a woo-woo subject if ever I heard one.
well, it is, but I think, we're not afraid to cover these things, are we? So,
But I think that's a good start point. I know a lot of people, if you like, if I was to sort of raise this idea of self-awareness and say that you really need to develop, they would like dismiss it out of hand. So it's like,
yeah,
why is there this sort of resistance that a lot of people have to the idea of developing self-awareness? Because I think it's crucial. I think it's a great topic.
I think it's crucial as well. I mean, do you think it's the language, i.e., the label that it's given, this sort of notion of self-awareness, and people dismiss it, thinking, well, or don't really understand it? What does that mean, self-awareness?
Yeah, I think that's part of it, but I think there's something else as well. I think you're right in a way that because of there's a certain type of person that talks about that self-awareness, and it comes in. If you go into a bookshop, not that there are many bookshops anymore, but it's in that any books around self-awareness are in that little section called self-help.
Yeah,
And it's like, I hate that term, self-help or self-improvement.
yeah,
I think that whole thing is part of the problem of how a topic or a skill, because I think it's a skill
yeah.
of self-awareness gets denigrated, it gets belittled, and it causes people to actually not understand it and really not want to investigate it.
Well, they reject it, don't they?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's one final factor. It's like, actually, at an intuitive level, we all know that opening the box, looking in that mirror is scary. We don't want to see what we see. We don't want to get those feelings coming up. So we just think, and my dad used to say this all the time: I am who I am and I can't change.
Yeah.
So level of self-awareness, probably 100%. Desire to do anything about it, 0%.
Yeah. Well, it's that old adage, a leopard can't change its spots and all that sort of stuff. There's lots of these little sayings, aren't there, that reinforce the fact that we can't change.
Absolutely.
Which is, again, I think, we've talked in the past about arguing for limitations. I think they're just a way of verbalizing that, aren't they, for people? So,
well, that phrase you just used, the leopards can't change its spots, is something that hits right into my heart, because at a very critical time in my life when things were going wrong, somebody very close to me threw that at me, as a justification for not wanting to carry on a relationship. And it caused me, I mean, in a way it was a good thing that this person did it, because it caused me to reflect on that. And actually what I came to see, and it connected me right back to my dad. And I remember, when I was a teenager, my mum and dad having rows, and my dad saying, I am who I am, I can't change. And my mum like being in tears of frustration over this, because her perspective was just not like being considered. So it threw me all back to that. And in a way it was a good thing, because I probably wouldn't have taken the path that I've taken over the last 10, 12 years, without that stimulation to think about this whole idea of change. Because I think in the end, that's what self-awareness is about. It's like, can you recognize who you are, where you are right now? And sort of also create a vision of who you want to be and where you want to be in the future. And create a path for yourself. You can't do any of that without self-awareness.
No, exactly. Or the the willingness to look in that mirror and address what you see, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, when you think about people that you've worked with, I mean, particularly business leaders, what do you think is the biggest resistance they feel to this idea of self-awareness?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I had one business leader spring to mind immediately who it constantly goes around in circles whenever I speak to him. Wants to do something, wants to make a change. Doesn't fully recognize he's part of the problem and the barrier to that change, and kind of, you know, expects everyone else to be doing all the changes. But I don't know, I've never quite really worked out whether that's ego, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
You know, it's a bit of a my way or the highway, you know, style that he's got. And it was bizarre, because I remember doing coaching for his entire senior team, and all of them shared the common belief that he was the problem. He was the barrier. His style and way of working was the barrier. And when you think, you know, when I think back, I mean, I've known him for a long time, and done work with him over the years, different guises. He's never really changed much, in terms of his approach to business, to leadership, to management, to strategy either. You know, he's always adopted the same thing. And every now and then you'll pop up and you'll have this talk about, you know, this ambition or this aspiration to affect change, and he'll paint you a vision of what he wants, but he doesn't then connect what's needed to get him to that vision, and his involvement in that. He attributes it to everyone else. So I know I've gone around the houses there answering that, but so I think it's a whole mix of things as to, in terms of why that would be. I mean, I've never really, you can't really speak to him about it, because he's closed off to it.
As you think back to that business, would you say that the culture of that business was an open culture, or was there a blame culture?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think there's a blame culture that stems from the top, for sure.
I'm thinking about that particular business where you have
that particular business. There's definitely a blame culture that permeates from the top.
Right.
I think as you often do, you get within businesses, you get subcultures form, different groups have different dynamics when they come together. And I think what's interesting is there's very much an open subculture on the kind of what you would call the coalface. You know, and there is a good sense of team and togetherness, but it's broken down and chipped away via any sort of leader involvement.
Because I've worked with businesses where, as you were saying, right, the leaders, they didn't look inward and say, okay, what is it that we are doing that's causing this culture? They always were looking outwards. They were blaming their staff. You know, it was literally, oh, well, we've got the wrong people. We haven't got good enough people. You know, why won't people take responsibility? So there was all of these, what could you call it, faults that they were finding. And then they wondered why the culture wasn't great. They wondered why there was a blame culture. And then when you were talking to the people inside, you know, they would actually use that term. You know, there's a horrible blame culture in this business, and it's like really awful to work here. And it's like, okay, well, why don't you move? And then of course you've got all the challenges of moving and finding a new job.
Exactly.
And I think this is another big factor of self-awareness. Of course, it's like you take whatever you've got with you to your next job. So if you're not aware of what you're taking, you're just going to recreate your experience.
Exactly.
You know, so I think self-awareness is a fascinating subject. It's getting involved with it and really understanding it from my own personal perspective has absolutely transformed my life and the way I go about and the way I show up in the world. So for me, it's like the bedrock of everything, and I can't understand why people don't want to do it.
Well, I totally agree. I think you know, I kind of see it as developing your own narrative on life or whatever it is you're doing, and in order for that, you know, we all watch TV programs or read books, and you'll have character development an evolution throughout the course of a story, and you know, and within that, there's always elements of self-discovery, you know, and opening up of awareness, and you know, in order to get the most out of life, you need to really develop your own narrative. And you know, thinking about that business that I mentioned earlier, that you know, the narrative is very rigid in terms of it's you, not me.
Well, I
mean, the answers. Why aren't you people as smart as me, or why are you not seeing what I'm seeing? And you know, and thinking about it, even the setup, you know, the physical setup, you know, that person sits in an office tucked away from everyone else. You know, it's an old closed door kind of mentality where you knock on the door, you know, coming for a chat kind of thing. You know, which by definition is the opposite of open, isn't it? You know, when you're you know, set cultures and various things like that. So yeah, I do see it as a narrative. Well, I believe it's set or not.
Well, I think you've really hit on the core of it, because it is a narrative. For me, the biggest challenge is not for people to create the narrative, because I think people are creating a narrative all the time.
Irrespective.
It's like, the first step is to understand what is the narrative that you're creating. And so, I mean, just for clarity, it's like, what's the story that you're creating about events that are happening right now in your life? It's like, you know, are you taking responsibility for it? Are you blaming other people, circumstances? You know, what's the story you're creating in your mind about the way things are panning out? And that's the first part of self-awareness. It's to know what narrative you're creating is step one. But then step two is to know what's the narrative that other people are creating that's sort of sucking you in. And that's the second part of it. So I don't know how that sits with you.
No, I agree. I think that's why we have things like, you know, within business, you have things like 360-degree feedback, you know, in terms of trying to get to the bottom of that and get to the root cause, you know, the root of that narrative that you're saying. Because obviously you can't, the challenge with it is it's not wholly reliant on you looking in the mirror. It's also reliant on other people sharing what they see. And that's, you know, because we can still be blinkered even when we look in the mirror.
Absolutely.
So I do think, you know, there are tools, but I think some of those tools are not used in the spirit of what they're intended. You know, I've been involved with businesses who've, you know, wanted to bring in things like 360-degree feedback, and they've bastardized the process to get a result that supports their view of the world.
Well, that's unfortunately a lot of business leaders, they don't want to hear the truth. What they want to hear is that, you know, irrespective of the truth, they want to hear that people, that they're right, people like working for them, it's a good place to work. So as you say, they sort of doctor the process. But I just want to drag it back to the idea of the narrative, because I think there's some interesting, and I think we used an example of this in one of our previous chats, and it's one that gets used a lot, but it was a narrative used by one Carol Dweck, who is an educational psychologist, and she wrote a fantastic book called Mindset. And basically she ran this experiment where she divided two sets of teachers and two sets of kids, completely random. So they were like all good teachers, but they were randomly distributed into two groups, and a random distribution of kids of mixed abilities.
That's right, yeah.
And one set of teachers were given the narrative that they were teaching a really like dullard class, that they were like behind, they were difficult to teach, and they couldn't learn. And the other set of teachers were given the narrative that they were teaching the top of the class, really bright kids destined for success. And you can guess the story, because you know, the results that the kids got absolutely mirrored the narratives that the teachers were working to, and what the beliefs the teachers had about the kids. And it's a great story, and it's not a story, it's a scientifically proven pattern. But then you get other examples, and I don't know whether this is an apocryphal story or not, but I hope it's true, of this young guy struggling at school, and anyway, he miraculously gets a decent grade in one exam, beyond expectations, and it triggers him to believe, okay, well, maybe I'm not as stupid as people are telling me, and maybe I can go off and do it. And he goes off and goes to university, creates a great life, is very successful in life, only to find out some years later that actually it was the wrong result. He'd been given the wrong exam paper. Now, I don't know whether it's a true story or not. I hope it's true.
Yeah.
But I think it sort of talks into this idea of the narratives that we give ourselves, which of course then come back to self-awareness. So what would you say to somebody? Because it's like, if you're caught in a narrative, which we all do, I've been caught in narratives, you're caught in a narrative, right? We're creating a narrative right now about our lives. It's like, how do you break out of it?
I do think it is, it goes back to surrounding yourself with people who don't share your perspective and bringing in new perspectives, but being open to it. You've got to start by being open. And I think a lot of people have, we talked in the past about sort of self-limiting beliefs, and I do think that that's kind of, that story that you mentioned is, was rooted in self-limiting beliefs. People say I'm stupid.
Yeah.
And therefore I'm not going to amount to anything, or well, maybe I'm not. It's just whatever it is that can trigger that, or get a foot in the door, to open that door and see more of yourself and what's going on. You need to embrace that and explore it as well, and it's not going to be the same for everyone. Things like, we've talked about things like 360-degree feedback. That's a very basic way of doing that. But you've got to overcome that fear of what you're going to learn. I guess that's something that you can only really start small with. There's no point sort of jumping in at the deep end, because that's going to be too overwhelming, and the guards will go up even further. And so you've got to start with something small, maybe start with a specific area, and focus on that area to develop that and see what difference it makes. Track difference and track progress, which people don't often do. They don't often say, well, at the start of my narrative I was here, and in 6 weeks time this is where I am now. They don't tend to do that much, because they just get sucked into whatever's going on around them. It's a bit sort of water down a mountain, isn't it?
Well, I think you hit on a really important word there, fear. And there's another F word that goes with fear, and that's failure.
To say that, are we? Oh, okay. It's a different F word.
Different F word. That's right. And those two words, I think, when it comes to the idea of self-awareness, are really connected. It's fear of failure. And it's part of the reason, and I've definitely come across this in working with people, is that they won't look at where they are, because that immediately sets up a conflict in their minds between where they are right now and where they really would like to be, or where they think they should be. I mean, let's face it, we're all given some sort of route map. It's embedded into us from an early age. Go to school, get a job, or maybe start a business, or become a doctor, or an architect, or an accountant, whatever it might be. We're sort of given that as a bit of a roadmap that we have to follow.
And we inherit things as well from our parents and our families, and quite often, oddly or ironically, we inherit because we all want better for our children, don't we? And so we often find ourselves trying to provide a roadmap for our children that we can't relate to ourselves and haven't actually experienced ourselves.
I totally get that, and I know from my own personal experience, having thought about this a lot, that a lot of the way in which my mum and dad brought me up, my two brothers, was rooted in their own fear of failure.
Yeah.
i.e., you know, if you didn't do well at school, if you didn't then go, well, I was actually the first one to go to university, so I guess I sort of broke that mold. Neither my mum or dad did, but it's like they already had the idea that you really should, you know, you after school you had to go to college and university, even though neither of them did. So that was like the route map, and then you had to get a good job with somebody. You know, it's like the idea that if you had any artistic ability or talent, there might be a career outside of accountant, doctor, bank manager,
the dependable ones.
You know, that gave you a safe and secure income. Was so anathema to them. It was like not even anything that I could really contemplate. But in all honesty, I actually do. I do have to actually challenge that, because I think, again, this talks nicely into self-awareness. I was quite a good golfer when I was a kid. And when I was about 15, my dad said to me, if I could get my handicap down to scratch, he would fund me to like try and become professional. So my dad had done, you know, was really quite successful, obviously, by that point, or he couldn't have made that offer. But so in a way, I am contradicting what I just said about them really saying that I had to go and get a safe job. But at the same time, I'm not, because what my dad didn't have was any concept of what it takes to become a professional sportsman. So I'd be really, given your experience of being a professional sportsman, I'd love to get your take on that, and the self-awareness that is required to sort of take yourself out of the sausage machine safe direction.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I guess my journey into that was different to most, I guess, because I started off in the creative space. And so I was always encouraged with my creativity, even though neither of my parents had that. You know, they both did kind of, you know, my dad worked in a factory and my mum worked in a school. But I was encouraged with that because I was good at it. I was considered good at it. And there was no real thinking around where that would take me. It was just, you're good at that, you should stick with it. You know? And I think that was the driver behind that. And I always resisted basketball because I loved sport. I played all sports, and I represented the borough in different sports, and track and field, and all sorts of things. And I was a bit of an all-round sports player. But I resisted basketball because I didn't want to be labelled as a, you know, we'll have him because he's tall. You know, that kind of thing, because I was very tall. And it wasn't until I found the sport myself, just of an evening, I just started watching it on TV. And that opened me up to the excitement of it and the skill of it. And so that got me interested, and I liked the challenge of then learning that, learning how to play it, and actually, in a roundabout way, all my other sporting sort of interests helped massively, because it didn't, I didn't sort of fall into the trap of, well, you're tall, you should play this position, this is how you should play. I'm 6'9", and I grew up being fascinated with the small guys games, you know, and how they played and how they handled the ball and all that sort of stuff. But in terms of sort of encouragement and guidance, I guess, from my parents at the time, it was very minimal. It was, you know, I think their overarching guidance was, you know, if you're good at it, stick with it. And I think that's
cool,
which is fine, and that's what I did. But
what was it within you that led you to think that you could break out of the sausage machine of school, possibly college, and a safe job, to actually branch out and take that risk of becoming a professional sports person?
I guess it was belief in my ability to be good at it and to compete and to learn. I think it was actually, I think I'm quite confident in learning. That's my thing.
Right.
If I'm honest, just breaking this down as a little epiphany while we're talking. I'm quite confident in learning. So if someone gives me a concept or shows me something, I can do that.
Yeah.
And I was always very good at we've I don't know whether we've talked about this in terms of sort of the 10 types of intelligence. There's this idea there's 10 different forms of intelligence, and I think this physicality and this ability to follow instruction has always been something that I've been really confident with.
Yeah.
And that probably comes from my creative side of art. I can see something and draw it and replicate it and all that sort of stuff, and that's what I used to do. So that kind of reinforced that belief that I could do things, with my, like, physically. So I think
so can I just interrupt? So would you say that actually part of your ability to make this choice was rooted in your self-awareness?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of my ability to think, well, I can do something here. And obviously I did have a natural advantage because I was very tall. But it's but I spent a long time. I mean, I totally absorbed myself in the sport, and I spent 2 years without any coaches, and basically walked into the top team in the country at a college level. Did really well within that team, having only played the sport for 2 years, and then went into professional basketball. But it's but during that 2 years of where I didn't have a coach, I mean, like, the coach at my school team was the CDT teacher. Because he knew the rules.
Sure.
But every moment I had, I would be over in parks around the country playing games against people from all over the place, observing the game, watching the sport, and just mimicking what I'd learned and putting things together.
So that's
to develop a skill set.
And that's an incredible. I think that's an incredible level of self-awareness. I'm comparing it to my own story of how I almost went the other route with my golf, and I looked at people at my age who I thought were, well, I didn't just think, I could see from the way they played the game, they were like so much farther ahead of me in terms of their ability. And my brain at that time just went, well, you'll never be as good as that. And the story that I tell everyone is when I was at that 15-year-old, I got to play for North Wales. And in that same team was a young guy called Ian Woosnam. I don't know if you've heard of Ian Woosnam. For those who haven't, Ian went on to become like the world's #1 golfer, won the Masters, one of the top 4 major tournaments. And he and I played in the same team, and there was one, I always remember playing one game with him. It was a practice match for the Welsh Boys Open competition, which was being held in Penarth in Cardiff. And there was just one shot he hit. It was a tee shot. I can't remember the hole, something like the 13th or 14th. This hole, just the tee was raised, so you had this amazing panoramic view of the hole. And he hit this ball, and it was in the days when woods were woods. They were still made from not modern technology. And I'd never seen a ball hit like that. I'd never heard the sound of a ball like that. And in that moment, my brain just went, you will never hit a golf ball like that. And it's like, that was it. And even though my dad had said, okay, look, if you can get your handicap down, I'll do it. My brain went, forget it. And then I took the path that I took. So, but that was just a narrative. That was a narrative that I had in my head for some reason, and like
safety.
And so I think this is a great sort of couple of personal stories that illustrate this idea of self-awareness and narrative, and how we get ourselves into this very narrow ways of thinking which support our beliefs, our limiting beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, it does trigger a quote. There's a lovely quote from a book. Actually, I've got it somewhere. Bear with me a second. But there is a lovely quote from a book, which is around prioritization and focus, basically. And that's what it took. You know, looking back at my basketball career, it was focus. You know, I had complete tunnel vision, and in the end, I completely lost, you know, interest in art and design and all the other things that I'd been doing all that time.
Yeah,
I'd found something that I really was passionate about, loved, and believed that I could succeed at, versus something that I was good at, and just happened to be good at. And there is this great quote in this book about focus, which is, how many ships didn't set sail because of the belief the earth was flat? How much progress was impeded because man wasn't meant to breathe underwater, fly through the air, or venture into outer space? Historically, we've done a remarkably poor job at estimating our limits. And that's stayed with me, that quote, because I just think it's so true. You know, and we continue to do that. You know, we still don't know what our limits are.
Well, I've got a similar quote actually. When I was in my early 20s, I'd sort of bombed out. So I'd been through the sausage machine, had gone to school, gone to uni, got the degree, got my first job, and it was like, I just thought, my God, all I can see is like this black tunnel of working, and there's a white light at the end of which is retirement, and my head blew, and so I left this job that I got, and I was in the wilderness, if you like, for about probably a good couple of years. And my dad bought me a book which is called The Fountainhead, written by Ayn Rand. And it's a bit of a challenging book in today's politically correct climate, because most people regard it as a bit of a far right treatise. Personally, I don't see it that way, but of course, everything's open to interpretation. But there's a fantastic quote in it, which is, I've got to get this right now. It's not who can tell you what you can do, it's who can stop you. You know, it's like, it's not who can tell you can do something, it's who can stop you. And you know, for most of our lives, we work or we live in this sort of chamber of people telling us what we can and can't do. And there's a very few people who step outside of that, because they have that, either they found the thing that you found in basketball, or they have that inner self-belief, and they just say, no, you know, it's like, I'm going to go and do what I want to do. You know, of course, when you're at school, if you're that sort of person, you get branded as a rebel. And people try and pull you back. And it's very, very few people who have that inner strength to actually sort of say, no, you're not pulling me back. I'm going to go out and I'm going to create my own narrative. I'm going to follow my path. And and I think this is where the fear thing comes in, because actually once you do that, there's a sense that you cut yourself off from the support network of other people who make, you know, who want to feel safe, because you're part of that group.
No, absolutely. I think there's two aspects to the fear, isn't it? It's the fear of, like you said, we talked earlier about fear and failure. I think it's fear of failure, and also I think it's fear of the unknown, which is definitely, you know, they're kind of the two ends of the spectrum that people kind of are trapped between. I think you know, you've got to have that courage to. And it could be small. I mean, you know, looking back at my basketball journey, if you like, you know, the first year I played, this is funny actually. So the first year I played, we had the head of PE as the coach. They'd been asking me to play for ages, and I refused because I was into other sports, and you only wanted me because I'm tall. And there was a lot of tall people in my year at school as well. Like, unusually, there was about 5 or 6 people that were around 6'5", you know, by the time we ended school. Must have been something in the water. So when I started playing, I think I didn't take a single shot the entire season. But I found I had a natural anticipation for what people were going to do, and was great at blocking the ball. Great shot blocker to begin with. And then after a few games, I thought, well, that's what I'm going to focus on developing. And we we were bottom of the league. We finished bottom of the league, and I didn't shoot a single shot. And that summer, I locked myself in parks. I remember climbing over the park to get out at night where it was dark after I'd been there all day playing against people that were older than me, more experienced, different places, And the following year, the head of PE didn't want to know. He just said, you're not worth it. And we ended up with a CDT teacher who just knew the rules.
Right.
And we came in and we won the league, and I was the top scorer in the league.
Amazing.
And I'd kept that shot blocking ability.
Yeah.
But I just developed other aspects of my game. But it was a shot blocking that gave me something to work with. It was like the small nugget of something that I had.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's good to start small and build on it rather than look to.
But you have to be able to see that within yourself. So this is where the self-awareness.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
And so many people that I work with, there's another aspect that comes into this is confidence. And confidence is a very difficult word. Actually, it's easy to use, and it's easy to bandy it around and say, well, that person is very self-confident, that person is very lacking in confidence, when actually what I find is very often the people who look and try and sort of demonstrate their confidence are actually some of the least confident people.
And you can have spheres of confidence as well. I mean, you can be confident in one aspect and not in the other, and that's I relate to that, as you know.
And of course this is a crucial aspect of self-awareness, because it's like, if you can develop that awareness of, I mean, let's use the standard terminology, strengths and weaknesses. It's like we tend to be confident in the areas where we're strong and lack confidence in the areas that we're weak. And that's why I love your story about developing your shot taking, because obviously you developed a weakness and made it a strength. And I love that idea, because there's a strain of coaching that's out there, and it says, look, forget about your weaknesses, just develop your strengths. And okay, I sort of get that. Why invest time and effort trying to build something that you might not be able to build? Because there's usually a reason that there's a weakness. We all have different talents. Like you said, there's 10 different types of intelligence and talent.
I was never going to be a jockey, let's be fair.
Absolutely. And so it's like, invest your time and on the stuff that are your strengths, that you can become even better at. But it's like, you have to have that self-awareness around the weaknesses. Like, some of them you can build into strengths, most definitely. And some of them, they might be a weakness, but they might still, particularly in business, it might be something that you need, in your business. And then it's like a question, okay, well, how do I cover that weakness? And you can't cover that weakness if you don't have awareness of it, and you're not prepared to open up to it, and you're not prepared to then sort of think about the implications of it. So the whole idea of self-awareness, I think, is hugely important in so many different ways. And it's not just this woo-woo thing that exists in the self-help department of a bookshop. It's like the fundamental platform from which personal and professional success is built from. And if you don't have the willingness to look in that mirror and open Pandora's box and deal with whatever you don't like, you're going to be trapped. So sorry, that was a bit of a rant.
It's a good way to round up, I think. It's absolutely right.
Okay, do you think that's the end of it?
I think so. I think you've just got to, as you say, you've got to be prepared to open a glimpse in there and start small.
Yeah, I think there's just one other thing that I'd like to add, is that this is not a new idea. I mean, if you look back to the old philosophies, whether it's the Greek philosophers, the Chinese, the Indian philosophies, these all developed around about the same time, 2,500, 3,000 years ago. Whether you're looking at Buddha, Lao Tzu, Confucius, they were all within that sort of 200, 300, 400 year period. And they all talk about the importance of self-awareness one way and another. And one of the most famous is at the Greek, I think it's the Temple of Delphi, or the Delphic Oracle, I think it was called. And it was carved in this temple is know thyself, you know? And it's like, if they knew that 3,000 years ago, which they did, then, you know, this cannot be like modern day, new age, woo-woo thinking. This is like deep rooted, and it's something that we all need to embrace, and we need to say yes.
Yeah, it's fundamental, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.